Welcome to With Him podcast. I am Raz, and I'm glad to be with you guys today. This is my good buddy and co-host, Dr. J.
Yeah.
Still haven't seen the jump shot, but I'm about to stop if we don't get into some basketball somewhere in here. I don't know, maybe next winter.
Like
Who
the
knows?
20-year-olds don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, that's true. They're
like, who's Dr. J?
Googleize it. Get on the line and check out who Dr. J is. Well, hey, we're excited today. We've got a really good friend with us. He's been a good friend of mine for a long time. I've known his family for a long time. They are awesome. And so we've got our good friend Scott Hobart here to share his story with us today. And to this guy looks like Jesus all over. And so we love being with him. I love to be around him. And he knows what it means to do stuff with Jesus, not for him. So we're going to talk about that because that's what this show's about, right? Yeah. I think so. All right. Well, that's what we're going to do. Well, you know what? I'm going to jump right into it. Hey, Scott, we're so glad you're here with us. We love to start most of the time with this question is give us, however you want to work it through your version of your God story of how did you come into Christ? Like we've got some people in here who came in late. We had D, a guy Dennis Bosager, who came in real late. We've got people like myself and Jamie who were pretty sure our moms might have delivered us in a pew, possibly.
Yeah.
Which I think
which
I know someone's right there. Clean it up. We're ready to go. Let's start worship. Anyway, that's what I feel. I don't remember ever not going to church on a Sunday morning. I think I went in sick. But anyway, so Scott, what's your God story? Where are you following that? And tell us how'd you come to Christ? How'd you start following Jesus?
I accepted Christ when I was 15 years old. And my God story is that I was raised Roman Catholic. And we were the family that whenever the church was open, we were there. Mm-hmm. In fact, we'd have Holy Day of Obligation. And my elementary school shared a parking lot with the Catholic Church, St. Agatha in Gagetown, Michigan. And we would be let out of school to walk across the parking lot to go to church.
Wow!
On a Holy Day of Obligation. It was a small farming town, and that was life. And 3/4 of the school was Catholic.
Yeah. And this is a public school you're talking about.
This is Owendale Gagetown Elementary School.
Yeah, not the Catholic school.
I was in third grade, and the church itself, the building itself, St. Agatha, is on the Michigan Historical Register. They call it a cathedral and a cornfield. And if you want, just for fun, and it really is. From our farm was about 4 miles west of the church, and from our kitchen window you could see the church. It sat on the hill, and if you want to Google it, St. Agatha Catholic Church in Gagetown, Michigan, it's an impressive structure, and it's almost like it shouldn't be there. Like it's this enormous Catholic cathedral in this little bitty town.
Right.
And so we were there all the time, and I was an altar boy. I was a big kid. I grew big little. Mm-hmm. So I was tall, and I could carry the chalices, and I could carry all the things, and so I became an altar boy, and I was like the altar boy extraordinaire. Like I was always, in fact, when I was not even scheduled to be an altar boy, I would be in the pew, and about 15 minutes before the mass, the priest would look out and go, "We need you." Yeah. And so I was an altar boy all the time, and then so I was always like I understood religion, I understood God, and the crucifix in the was right there. And so I was always, church was an enormous part of our life. In fact, I remember starting the harvest, the winter wheat harvest in July, and a new priest actually came out to the farm to bless the harvest. And I remember this very distinctly. He came out in this old black car, and he was in his his alb and in his cassock and all that, and he came out to the field, and he had the holy water, and he would sprinkle it on, and we would genuflect, and we would do all that, and he brought incense. And my dad freaked out because here is burning incense,
right.
wheat stubble. And my dad was very gracious, and he goes, Father, he said, you can't bring that in the field. You don't want to start the field.
Water's great.
The water was
great.
The water was fine,
but not the fire.
So church was always, and Catholicism was important, and we followed, Fish on Friday and all that. And then when I was in high school,
stop for 1 second. Let me ask you this. So when you were doing the altar boy, altar boy thing and all that. Were you, sometimes kids, even in the midst of religion, whatever, did you feel like it was like, did you feel like you were experiencing God, or was it that you felt important doing what you were doing? Like sometimes, because sometimes kids they sense that God's happening. Like we've had other people in here say, well, I came to Christ at this point, but I knew that I was experiencing something. Now, were you really wanted to be in there because you were experiencing it, or you felt good that you were needed? I'm just curious.
I think it was more I felt good that I was needed.
Okay.
And people liked the fact, like people are like, oh, you're a good altar boy. Like you're a good boy. You're a good Catholic boy.
Affirmation.
Yeah. And all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And, we were raised with, we worked like we were workers, and your value was working.
Right.
And so if you were needed, you pitched in.
Yeah.
And
and I'll say to this day, number one, I do think, you were raised that way, but I do think you have service gifting. No question in my mind, because anytime you need something, Scott's there. And so I do think part of it's being raised that way, but there is, spiritual gifting of being a person who serves and likes to serve and loves people through service. My wife's a lot like that. So anyway, but okay, go on. I was just curious about that because for a kid to be like, I was showing up even when they weren't hiring me.
Exactly. Right.
When I wasn't on schedule,
Yep. And then I got in high school.
Yeah.
And it was funny story was I wanted to play football. And everybody played football, and it was Michigan, and my dad was dead set against me playing football. Oh. And when I was in 8th grade, the varsity coach and the coaching staff came to a gym class in 8th grade, and the day we didn't realize it, but that class was basically to showcase, does anybody here in 8th grade have football acumen?
Right.
And I was a pretty good-sized farm boy at the time, and I could throw a ball 50, 60 yards. And Coach Schelke kind of pulled me aside, and he's like, we could have you, like, maybe be the quarterback. And I thought, wow, the quarterback of the high school football team. So I'm thinking, oh, okay. So I wanted to go out for football, and my dad was dead set against it. And he And so I snuck around and went to football practice. And my dad was also on the school board, so he was in the building, not on a regular basis. And one day he came to the school and he saw me in a football uniform, and he wasn't mad. Like, he got it. He understood the peer pressure, and he just said, Scotty, he said, you're not playing football.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, I got it. And he went and told the coach, he goes, he is not playing football. Well, here I am, like, I love sports, and I'm like, well, if I don't play football, what am I going to do? Right. Well, the cross country team said, hey, we need, and on cross country, you have to have 5 guys to actually make a team. And we only had 4. And Claire Trischler was the captain of the cross country team. And he was he was the captain. He was a senior. He was all-state basketball player. He was a stud. And he goes, hey man, I want you to run cross country. And I'm like, cross country? That's running. But I wanted to be in a sport.
That's the punishment for other sports.
That's right.
Bad.
Well, we used to have T-shirts that said, our sport is your sport's punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
So I started running cross country. I'm like, what am I doing? And my dad thought, okay, running, that's fine. You can do that. Because I was also a farm kid, and we had a pretty good sized farm, and I farmed. Like, I wasn't like a helper.
Right.
I farmed, and so my dad was like,
he was afraid of you getting hurt. In football,
well, he was also afraid of, like, you can't be at practice. Yeah. You got to be in the field.
I need you working.
I need you driving truck. I need you driving a combine or whatever. And so he felt like, well, you could run wherever, like whenever. And the coach at the time, Dennis Meck, said, yeah, you're right. Like, if you just chose to be on the team, you can run whenever you want. And I would. And so anyway, long story short, it was our second meet of the year. And my first meet of the year, it was back then. It wasn't 5K. It was 3 miles, and I ran it in my bare feet.
What?
Well, no, I ran in the first meet in my in gym shoes because I didn't have spikes. I didn't have anything, and I ran this race, and I remember this distinctly. I ran a 19:19 for 3 miles in basketball shoes, and because I didn't know any better.
Right.
And it was hard. Like, it was like 3 miles was hard, but in basketball shoes. Right. And we ran on golf courses and all that, so it wasn't that bad. And then the next meet, we were at Mayville, Michigan. It was a Mayville Invitational, and I had my basketball shoes on, and the starter said, "Hey, do you want to go put your spikes on, son?" And I said, "Dude, I don't have any." And he goes, well, you can run barefoot if you want. And I'm like, is that allowed? And he goes, yeah, it is. And I'm like, well, I would rather run barefoot than run in these big basketball shoes. So I took them off. Well, then I realized a little bit about cross country is that these other guys had spikes, and they had what back then they're illegal now, but they were tiger spikes, and they would rip your legs apart. And there was the straightaway, and then there was a sharp right curve. And my coach said, hey, you do not want to be in the pack.
Right.
So you get ahead or stay back. Well, staying back didn't fit my demeanor. So I sprinted ahead of everybody and got around that first turn safely. Well, I ended up running a 17:17 in bare feet. And I just thought, this is kind of cool. And, this is, cross country and all that. So anyway, long story short, we're in the school van. We didn't have a school bus. We had like one of those little minivans. And Claire shared the gospel on the bus. And I knew enough about religion that I'm like, I know who Jesus is. And I really wasn't sold on the sacraments of the Catholic Church. And I wasn't dissing the Catholic Church, but I just felt like the gospel of grace and salvation and all that resonated with me. Like, I'm like, I think I have to have that. And what I also learned a little bit was that in our church, in our school, there were two distinct groups. There were the Catholics and the Protestants. And the Catholics were like defending Catholic. We're Catholic. And the Protestants, which typically were the Baptists, they were kind of like pro-Jesus, not pro-Baptist. And I saw that as being different.
Yeah.
And when Claire laid it out, he actually gave me a ride home that night. They lived on a farm not far from us. And I remember being in my driveway, and he said, Scott, he goes, do you understand what I'm saying? I said, I think I do. And he goes, do you understand that it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is where your salvation lies? And I said, I do understand that. And he goes, is that something you want? And I said, absolutely.
Wow.
So in the driveway, it was.
Well, why did he ask you specifically, do you think? Or did you just saw the way you were looking?
I was listening to him.
And listening
like the other guys on the van, there was probably at this time, there was like 7 guys in the van, and they were always being polite. I mean, it was Claire. He was the captain.
Right.
He was like, got to listen to him.
Wow.
And I,
so this senior kid shares the gospel with all you guys
with
on
me
that
very
van.
clear.
Oh, that is so
and
cool.
then he asked me, and I remember accepting Christ that night in my driveway. It was late October 1979.
Right.
And I've been endeavoring to work out my faith ever since. So that's how I came to the Lord.
That's so cool.
From a very religious family to really a personal relationship.
How did your family respond to that? I mean, what was, because I'm thinking if mom and dad pretty devout, what was some of the engagement there?
So here's what was interesting about my family dynamic. So my family historically were all Methodists. My grandfather, my dad's father, was in his early 30s, and he was not married. He was a very good farmer. My great-grandfather was an outstandingly good dairyman. And the guys in the neighborhood were like, hey, Harlan, you're 30 and you're not married. Is there something wrong with you? And there was nothing wrong with my grandfather. He just, he was into his business. And he got frustrated one night and he said, I'm going to go get married. So he went to Gagetown to a Saturday night dance, and he met Helen Carner, this good Irish girl. And he was like, I think I want to marry you. And she said, I'll marry you, but you got to be Catholic. And he goes, all right, fair trade.
That was your granddad?
That was my granddad. So he gave up Methodist to get married to Helen, the good Irish Catholic. And they got married, and then he became a devout Catholic. And then my father was a devout Catholic. Well, in the meantime of all this, when I was 11 years old, my biological mother died of cancer. Very tragically, she was 42 years old, and my dad remarried a woman, a wonderful woman, Janine, my stepmom, whose husband had died in a farming accident. And so they had a farm about 8 miles away, and then we had our farm. And Dad met Janine, and they got married, and they put the two farms together. Well, Janine was Lutheran. So they made an agreement that Dad would remain Catholic. Okay. Janine would remain Lutheran, and they would go on Sunday morning. They would go in opposite directions, and that's how the house was. So I had a half Protestant house, half Catholic house, and in fact, one day I was
marriage.
One day I was on the altar. It was an altar boy, and we had a visiting priest who was like hard and he basically said, if you are associating with Lutherans, you're going to go to hell. And so many. And I'm standing up, I'm behind him on the altar, going, excuse me. Like I wanted to say, excuse me, but my mom is Lutheran. Does that mean? So the answer was Dad was okay with it. Like he, I wasn't drinking, I wasn't smoking, I was doing really well in school and sports, and I was helping out on the farm. So like to him, okay, fine, you want to go to, and I went to Bible study with like the captain of the football team and the captain of the basketball team. So I was associating with good guys. My dad was kind of liking that and all that. So really no pushback, except I do remember this one night. I went to a Bible study at the Evangelical United Brethren Church, the EUBs.
Okay. I've never heard of that one. I was
on the corner of Colwood and M81. And I had a very distinct pickup truck that I drove in high school. It was navy blue and it had a yellow fuel tank on the back that it was a nurse tank for our farms, and it was very distinct. There was only one like it. And my grandfather was coming home from someplace, and he noticed that my pickup was in the parking lot of the EUB church. And apparently it was scandalous. And when he got home, he got a hold of my dad, and he said, "Why is Scott at an EUB church?" And Dad came up to me and he goes, "I know you're at a Bible study, and I get all that, but," he said, "you got to cool it with, just." Because if Grandpa, doesn't like this. And Grandpa was like saying things like, "Hey, if you can't get control of Scott, I'm going to write you out of the will." Like it was pretty serious.
Wow.
And Grandpa was a hard-line Catholic. And Dad was kind of like, whatever. And then another quick funny story was I dated a girl in high school. It was a Christian girl. And she was from another town. And I remember this distinctly. I came home. It was like midnight on a Friday night. And my dad said, "So what did you guys do tonight?" And I said, "We went to a gospel sing at her church." And I'm not exaggerating. My father looked at me and he said, "When are you going to go out drinking with the boys?"
Oh, my God.
Oh, wow.
Because in his mind, I was taking this religion thing kind of to an extreme.
Yeah.
But I was biblically committed to honoring my parents. And as long as I lived in their house and as long as I was under his roof and his care, like I went to the Catholic Church and I participated in the church, and I moved up from being a altar boy to being a lectern. And I was a tall kid at the time, and so none of the altar boy stuff fit anymore. So I started wearing priests' albs and cassocks and like I look like a priest. And people came up to me and they would say things like, "Have you thought about the priesthood? Have you thought about the priesthood?" In fact, at one point, the Diocese of Saginaw required every church in the diocese to send 2 boys to an encounter weekend,
Right.
and to to kind of think about, and of course they had the cool priests from all over, and one priest
Football tryouts all over.
yeah, it was kind of like
Only
that.
God
And
tryouts.
I do remember the one priest. He drove it was either a Corvette or a Camaro.
Okay.
But it was a red sports car, and we were like, these guys are cool, and it was all the hip dudes.
Was
and
he
all
wearing
that.
skinny jeans? Is what
I don't think so. But we
don't
went.
think they existed.
Me and Mike Sullivan went, and
awesome,
and my dad encouraged me. He was like, "You need to go to this," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I will." To honor you, but I said, "I'm not going to be a priest. I'm not going to be a priest."
Yeah.
And like we came home, and none of the guys that went there, like we were all like kind of in the same boat. Like we're here because we have to.
Right.
And then when I went to Michigan State, I got involved in MSU Bible study and went to non-denominational and got in with a group of men there that were just Bible believers and that
Right.
kind of stuff. And so
Right.
when I came home in the summer to farm, I went to Catholic church to honor my dad. But when I was at East Lansing, I was non-denominational.
Right. Stop for 1 second. I want to talk about something just for a second. You know what's weird about cultural Christianity, and we'll call it that in your case, cultural Catholicism or whatever, is I found it interesting that with your dad and I've heard this before, is when you really become a fanatic for Jesus, when you actually really come hard on with Jesus, I'm like really like I want him. I've got to have Jesus. It's funny how that happens, where it's like, well, wait a minute, whoa, let's not get too overboard with this thing. See, I think that I've seen that a lot of times with I spent a long time in the South, and you have too down in Texas,
Yeah.
so you get a lot of cultural Christianity. It's like it's all great when it's like, oh, it's good, help you be a better person, help you
Don't get crazy
don't lie,
with it.
but don't be getting.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I'd heard that from not from my parents, but even like other friends, like, why are you so serious about this? Why are you, when we look at Jesus's teachings, there is no other way. He's like, if you put your hand to the plow and you look back, it doesn't work. If you don't want to leave father and mother, brother and sister, it doesn't work. And remember, we've said this before. Remember, even Jesus was accused of being overly fanatic.
Yeah.
His own, like
Yeah.
from his own mother and brothers and stuff like that. It's just interesting. Part of it's an encouragement for those of you out there that if you're really pressing into Jesus, you're going hard after him, you're going to get that kind of pushback because the evil one's fine with religion. He loves religion. It's one of the best things.
Right.
It's just as long as we don't, like you were saying, what caught your eye with the Baptist guys is they were defending Jesus, not their church. You know, he loves it if we'll just go do a bunch of religious things. But when you actually begin to get face to face with the one, who's going to set you free?
I will say this. So I was never radical. Like I was like I saw guys that were like.
But you were even viewed that way, though. It's interesting.
Yeah, I probably was. But for me, like I knew about Jesus from like my earliest recollections of anything because we were in church all the time.
Right.
So religion was always a big part of it, and Jesus was a big part of it.
Right.
And then when I became a Christian, it wasn't like I'm casting everything out. And I'm in the Jesus resolution. To me, it was okay. Now I understand faith in Christ alone.
Right.
And it's not works. It's by grace.
Right.
And then I knew that back to kind of my like this will sound odd that like words to me like don't tell me what you said.
Right.
What do you do? You know, my grandma used to say your action should speak so loud that I can't hear a word you're saying. So for me it was okay, if I'm going to follow Christ, I'm going to go to where people are following Christ. I'm going to go to the MSU Bible study, and it was a bunch of dudes on campus, and now they were radical. Like they, like there was a little bit of it was college, and it was kind of like, hey, are you going to come to the quad with me, and are we going to preach, and are we going to fire and brimstone? I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Pretty typical, especially.
And then when I graduated, got my job with Procter Gamble, moved to Chicago. And again, I was like, I'm a kid from a farm. I went to Chicago once in my life, but I knew D.L. Moody and I knew Moody Memorial Church. And so I said, okay, that's a church that preaches the gospel. I'm going to start going to Moody Church. And then one Sunday, Erwin Lutzer says, hey, shake hands with the people around you. And a beautiful girl in a blue dress shook my hand.
Yes, she did, Scott.
And I married her a year later.
There you go.
And then Heather and I, as committed Christians, said, okay, as husband and wife, we will, and because P&G, obviously it stands for Procter Gamble. It also stands for pack and go. And so you move around a lot. And so Heather and I made a commitment that wherever we live, almost before we find the house, let's find a church, a Bible-believing church. Now, in many cases, that happened to be a Baptist church just by the locations that we're at, but we've always committed ourselves to being in a Bible-teaching, fundamental church that preached the gospel and, wasn't religious more that it was just followers of Christ.
Right.
And so, that's the way we've lived our life ever since.
Something I love about you, Scott, is I agree with the actions. I mean, what Grandma told you,
that's good.
I see that in you. Yeah, I mean, you say what you believe, but also I know what you believe by the way that you act and by the way that you serve people. So I hear that. I hear Grandma's statement, and I see that in you. I'm curious about P&G, a farm boy who now enters into the P&G world. And some of our listeners may not be aware of some of the uniqueness of P&G. If you're in Cincinnati, you kind of get a feel for it. But talk a little bit about you're a farm boy. And now you're working for this huge company, P&G. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so my degree was in agricultural economics, and I grew up, like when I say I grew up on a farm, like we milked cows and we had land, and I ran trucks and tractors and field cultivators and picked rocks and hoed sugar beets and did things that probably weren't legal as far as running big equipment on the roads and stuff like that. But I grew up in a culture that was allowed. Like, we just did. And so I went to Michigan State to study agriculture, and I had every intention of coming back to the farm. And if you know anything about agriculture and the history of agriculture, the 1980s was statistically some of the very worst economic times, more farm foreclosures in the United States and all that. And my dad came to me my sophomore year and he said, listen, he said, this may not be the best time to come back to the family farm. Now, he said, now we are financially stable enough that if you want to, we can make this work. But he said, Scott, it's really hard. It's really hard. And he goes, if you've got other interests, you may want to pursue them. The farm will always be here. And I felt like, wow. And I said, well, what does Grandpa think about that? And he goes, Grandpa's aligned to that. Like Grandpa's total. And so I got like this permission to look off the farm. Well, I think my dad thought, well, that meant I was going to go to work for John Deere or Pioneer Seed or an agricultural company. And I was getting my degree in agricultural economics, and I had two professors, Dr. Tom Pearson, Dr. Jack Allen, and both of them said to me, they said, hey, you've got skills and talents that you don't realize are marketable outside of the farming world. And he said, you may want to pursue this. And their advice was, look at the company, not necessarily how much money you're going to make or what products they make, but the company, like, can you see yourself working in that culture? Do you like the people that you see and all that? And so I was interviewing, and interviewing was good back when I graduated in '86. And I actually had 10 job offers coming out of Michigan State. Now, Michigan State was also well known at that time for you went there and got a degree and got a job. In fact, they had the #1 placement office in the United States. Companies came to Michigan State looking for people. And I got a call from Procter Gamble. And I'm like, I've heard of them. And I had my first interview with them, and I was so impressed with the two people that interviewed me, Gary Kofer and Mary Pickering. I was like, man, if people like that want me, I'm interested in that. And then I did, the plant tour and all that kind of stuff, and spent a day in the field with Jesse Thompson, who you all don't remember, but Jesse was a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. He was an All-American at Cal. And I remember when he called me and he said, hey, Scott, this is Jesse Thompson with Procter Gamble. I want you to come to Detroit and spend a day with me to get a feel for the job and all that. And I hang up the phone. I'm like, Jesse Thompson from Detroit. And I'm a big Detroit Lions fan. I'm like, that can't be the same guy. Yeah. Well, I met him at the Novi Hilton Hotel, in the morning, and I, parked my rental car there, and I walk in and I meet Jesse, and I'm like, dude, that's Jesse Thompson. and now it was cool. I didn't want to say a thing the whole day. Right. And we spent the day together, and I was just so impressed. I was like, here's a guy that played for the Lions, and he's working for P&G, and the way that he talked about P&G, and I was so impressed. So, I want to tell this quick story. So we're down to the last interview, and P&G, the process is laborious. Like, it is several, got to take tests, and you got to do all that. So it's the last interview. There was a handful of jobs in the United States in sales, beginning sales rep jobs. And there were 7 candidates for those jobs. And at this point, this is like the 6th step in the process. And they flew us all to Cincinnati, and each of us had a 1-hour meeting with a guy named Alan Roth, who was the national sales manager for the United States at the time. And it went like this. We'd go into his office, and each one of us went in, individually. So we were down there for the whole day. I was 7th. I was the last one of the day. Man. So all day long, like, they're going to the archives and, kind of killing time all day long to wait for my interview. So I go into his office, and he looks at me, and he's like, listen, he goes, at this point, everybody's the same. He goes, so I have one question for you. He goes, I'm looking at your resume, I'm looking at your background and all this. He goes, what makes you a better candidate to work for Procter & Gamble than any of the other 6 people I'm going to interview today? Wow. And I had prayed about this before I went in. I'm like, Lord, give me the words that I don't have. And I remember saying this. I said, well, Mr. Roth, I said, listen, I said, I'm a farm boy from Michigan. I said, I grew up milking cows. I grew up working in the fields. And I said, I don't know the first thing about marketing consumer products. And I said, I'm not even sure I could name 5 brands that Procter & Gamble makes. And I said, so you're going to have to teach me how to do this. But I said, what you're not going to have to do is teach me how to work. Yeah. And I said, I literally know how to make hay when the sun shines. Right. And I said, the reason we have lights on the tractor is when it gets dark, you just turn them on and keep going. And I said, and I know what it means to stick with a job until it's done. And he kind of looked at me and he smiled, and he didn't say much.
That is
But
P&G thing, man.
a couple weeks later, I was given the job in Chicago, and it was the quality of the company, it was the quality of the brands. It had been in business for 150 years at that time, and I just knew that was the right fit, and it was something that the Lord had led me to. And I went in kind of with the attitude of, I'll go work in the city for a couple years, and I'll go back to the farm. And it actually worked out that my dad actually retired early. Rented out the land and all that, and I stayed with P&G, and it worked out. I mean, God's plan was wonderful.
Yeah.
And
for our listeners, how many years were you at P&G, and then where were you at the end whenever you retired?
So it was 36 years, and the beauty of Procter Gamble is you can work for one company, have multiple jobs, and so the last 7 years of my career, I was in a group called Professional Oral Health. So my customers at that time. My unique job within professional oral health was the dental education community in the United States, where I was calling on the deans of the dental schools. And what my job was is to open up pathways for my salespeople to be able to go into these universities and dental hygiene schools across the country and explain our unique science of Crest and Oral-B products to the dental students, so that when they become dental professionals, they then can recommend our products to their patients. And that was a huge part of our business model, was the recommendation of dental professionals.
Sure.
And as part of that, I was a board member of the American Dental Education Association in Washington, D.C., and had influence in the industry and stuff like that. But yeah. That's what I did the last 7 years.
Funny about that? This is really funny. And I've told you this before when we've had breakfast, whatever, together. I remember being a little kid. And I don't know if I'm old enough where they did this. I don't know if they did this with you, Jamie, since you're such a young whippersnapper. And I could have babysat you. But I remember being like, I don't know, maybe 5th or 6th grade. Maybe younger than that. Maybe like 3rd grade. And I remember it was probably part of some, like a PE class or something, but it was like a health something rather. And bottom line is, like a dental assistant maybe came in and explained to us about brushing your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't know what was happening back then, but they came in to explain how to brush your teeth and whatever. And they told us as little kids that Crest was the best toothpaste, that's what they recommended because it would help you not get cavities. And back then, when they were drilling down, they were drilled down hard. Like, so you're a kid, that's like worse than the worst nightmare when your mom's like, you got a cavity, we need to go to the dentist. No,
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I'm going to use Crest. The rest of my life, I never used anything.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that.
That would Scott's not that old. It wasn't because of Scott on that one.
Yeah,
He was,
right.
But anyway, it's just funny because you get something like that when you're young, in your head. I mean, that's why these sports companies, if you're 4th grade and you think Michael Jordan and Nike is the bomb.
Oh yeah.
That's why you look at these, golfers like Finau wearing his Nike golf shoes out there or whatever, when they're adults. But anyway, that works. That's a smart play. And for those of you who aren't, again, Cincinnati, it's almost insider information a little bit.
Yeah.
But if you're not familiar with P&G, go look around your house, and I guarantee you have 100 products in your house that are P&G.
Yep.
I mean, because you mentioned like Oral-B, like that's not called P&G, it's called Oral-B. But if you're using Oral-B anything, that's from
for the longest time, we did not use Procter & Gamble and the name Procter & Gamble in our advertising because we didn't want people to know Procter & Gamble's irrelevant. We wanted them to know Tide, Bounty, Charmin, Pantene,
Huggies,
Crest. Yeah. Well, Pampers and Loves.
Pampers. Sorry.
Edit that.
I'm new to Cincinnati, so
no, that's okay. And my first 10 years with P&G was in paper products, and so Huggies was the enemy.
Right.
So
Michigan, Ohio.
Yeah. Huggies and Pampers. Exactly. No, that's right. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about back at earlier in your story, we've got this influential athlete, and he's sharing with you.
Claire Trischler.
And I'm thinking about your heart. I know this about you, that, in your P&G career, you were looking for ways.
Yep.
You were looking for ways to not get up on a soapbox, and share the gospel necessarily, but you were looking for ways to incorporate faith, to incorporate belief in Jesus in your job.
Yep.
So I'd love and part of this podcast is we're looking for, like, trying to have conversations with people to learn, like, how do you bring Jesus into whatever you're doing?
Yep.
I'd love to hear just some of your heart and your thoughts about what did it look like in that career to partner with Jesus in your job.
Yep.
Love to hear some of that.
Okay, great. Yeah, the mission field is wherever we work. And the one thing that I have a bent towards is, and I don't mean this to be self-deprecating, I'm not the sharpest tool in the drawer. Like the one thing about P&G that I learned and lived with for 36 years was, man, these people around me are really smart and gifted and talented. And how did I end up here? Like I meant that because these are world-class thinkers and people. And so for me, it was, how do I simplify things? How do I, it's the practical, tactical, day-to-day, the 99-cent things in life. And I use that kind of thought process when I thought about how do I bring my faith to work. By the way, I think when you say stand up on your soapbox, the soapbox actually came from Procter Gamble,
exactly,
from Ivory Soap.
Unintended. Okay.
But so as I thought about that, there was 4 ways that I brought the kingdom, if you will, to P&G, and the first one is really obvious. P&G has a lot of believers. And it didn't matter. And I worked in 3 different countries in multiple different offices, different languages, and there's believers all over the world at Procter Gamble, and so Bible studies, book studies, gathering together in the office was a common. That was common, and it usually worked something like this. There would be somebody would lead it, and we would get on a calendar. Everything was calendar driven. It was like, you got to get it on your calendar. So it would be like the first and third Thursday of the month from noon to 1 o'clock, we're going to meet in conference room A1C and bring your lunch, and we'll watch a video. We'll do a book thing. We'll just fellowship. We'll break bread together. We'll pray for one another. People share what's going on, things like that. And that was pretty common. And that was clearly acceptable. In fact, when I was on the Walmart team in Fayetteville, P&G has a big office in Fayetteville. It was not uncommon for groups of people to get together before the day started and just pray. Yeah. And that was a pressure cooker. The Walmart team, the Walmart business, that was hard work, stressful. And so, it was a lot of people just getting on their knees and saying, Lord, just give us another day. And so that was pretty powerful. So we did a lot of that. And the Bible is very clear on don't forsaking, coming together. Yeah. And all of us that were Christians, virtually everybody they belonged to a church. Like on Sundays, we all went to church, but we supplemented that midweek with stuff that was really uniquely specific to us. And we would get together and we would often pray for our leadership. We would pray for unique things that were going on at the company at the time, good and bad. P&G is an imperfect company, and like a lot of places, and some decisions that were being made in our marketing campaigns and some of the positions we were taking socially. We would pray about them, but for the most part, we would just kind of edify one another, and that was, we would do that on a regular basis, and that was pretty much throughout my whole career. Yeah, wow. That we did that. Now it was a lot easier when I was in an office. So when I started, I was a sales rep. I was out in the field, and so you were by yourself. But whenever I was in the office, whether it was in Toronto, it was in Buenos Aires, or it was in Cincinnati or Mason, again, if you're from Cincinnati, P&G's got offices all over the city. No matter what building you were in, there was usually a Bible study.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Right. That's really cool.
And then the other one that I found.
Did you find as the years had gone, because you really haven't retired that long ago,
right?
Did you find any pushback from the company itself or HR or anything like that over the decades, or was it always pretty cool?
It was usually pretty cool.
With you guys.
Yep. It was pretty cool.
Wanting to be there, and
there was never we never got pushback like, oh, you can't do this. In fact, I found it interesting in Toronto. I was in the building one day, and I don't know, I was just someplace, and there was this door that I passed all the time, and I was like, there was something about that door. I was like, what is in there? And so one day, curiosity got me, and I opened up the door, and it was a Muslim prayer room.
Oh, okay.
And on the floor, there was a arrow.
Oh, okay. Yep.
That pointed towards pointed towards Mecca. Yeah. And there were Muslim, signage and things like that in the room. And I thought, okay, so the company obviously made a space for the Muslims to pray, and so there was never was there a place where they ever said that we couldn't be together.
Yeah.
That was just that the culture at P&G was very. It wasn't. They didn't get in our way.
Right.
And they would give us. We took our lunch hours, but we could do conference rooms and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Awesome.
I was just curious about that.
What else other than Bible studies?
So the other one, and this one was subtle, but maybe the most powerful of all of them, was praying for people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't proselytize in an office.
Yeah.
But you can pray for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this coming over here today. I don't ever remember a time that I offered to pray for somebody that they didn't say, "Oh, thanks."
Surprising, isn't it?
Wow, really?
Yep.
And I don't ever remember anybody ever saying, "Oh, dude, forget it. I don't need your prayers." Not
Right.
No. And so what had happened was, I had a lot of people that reported to me over the years. And so you obviously talked about the business. That was first and foremost. But when you had direct reports, you talked about personal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have, a woman would come in and say, "Hey, Scott, congratulations, I'm going to have a baby." Well, great. Let's you got to plan for that, and how are we going to plan for the maternity leave? Or Scott, my dad's dying. My dad's got cancer, and hey, I need to break away here a little bit of time to go be. P&G was very good about that. So you still had to get your work done. There was that was never an option. But P&G was always very good about working around, and you had to communicate the need, and then as long as you communicated it, we usually could find a way to work around these things. So I would get into some pretty intimate conversations with my direct reports. And then I would just find the right moment to say, "Hey, can I be praying about that? Can I pray about this?" And again, they would always say, "Yeah, that'd be great."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But then here's the power. That was one part of it. And they may not even believe, they may not even be faith. They're like,
Sure.
"But hey, if you want to pray for me, go for it."
Yeah,
I'm not, what could it hurt?
Right.
But we as Christians know there is power in prayer,
Sure.
and that we know that going before the throne with praying for somebody else is not only biblical, but we know it's powerful.
Mm.
Then I would make a note in my whatever, and 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I'd go up and say, "Hey, Jamie, 4 weeks ago I was praying for your dad. How's he doing?"
What's happening there?
That's when people would go, "Wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, okay, so you prayed for my dad?" "Yes, I've been praying for your dad every morning for the last 4 weeks."
Yeah.
"Well, let me tell you, he just got back from," and it opens up.
Awesome.
And if you do that enough with enough people, all of a sudden, people look at you a little bit differently. And I'm not doing it for people to look at me differently, but all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's a very tangible way to bring Christ into somebody's life. And they don't even really realize it, but they see the action. The old adage, your action speaks so loud I can't hear. So you can tell me you're praying, but when you follow up with me and ask me how, and you always get this, "Hey man, thanks for asking."
Yeah.
"Hey, thanks for asking about my mom. Thanks for asking about my son." Those kind of things. There was incredible power. And can I even say that it was kind of fun?
Sure.
It was you get nervous about, how do I share my faith, and how are they going to take it and all that. But when you're serving somebody else, you never have to be worried about serving. People like to be served.
Sure.
And that servant leadership kind of thing. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah. The other thing in that too is that we're all going to get that. Every single person, whether you believe in God or not, you're going to get that one phone call that's going to bring you to your knees.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about real things. My dad's got cancer. We're having a baby, but we think we're going to lose it. Or, these are real things, whether you follow God or not, that every single person's going to go through. So when you're asking about those things, you're getting to deep, real things. It's not the weather. It's not your sale. You're getting to deep, real things about people.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking also one of the unintended consequences, which is great here, is when you follow up. I'm just thinking about someone who maybe the Lord actually does bring healing, does bring resolution, and the person doesn't realize or isn't connecting that to the Lord. But when you follow up and then they go, "Oh,
That guy was praying.
actually, that guy was praying for me. I noticed over the last 2-3 weeks."
Yeah.
Dad got better or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, not every single time,
right,
obviously.
right.
But I'm just wondering, did you have any of those kind of
Sure did.
moments where the person goes, oh, well, yeah, I think God actually did ABC
Well,
or whatever.
you guys know this because you were part of this, and I wanted to bring this up. At the very end of my career, I had a lot of stuff going on with my organization. I actually lost one of my people. She died of cancer. It was rapidly.
Yeah.
I mean, I was with her when she died, and that was powerful. But I had another woman that had developed esophageal cancer, and I was on the phone. We were doing a virtual one-on-one, and at the end of the one-on-one, she said, "Hey, I need to tell you something." She goes, "I'm actually not at home. I'm in my car. I'm at UMass Medical, and I'm going in for some testing." And she goes, "I may have cancer." And so from that moment on, I said, "Sonia, I'm going to be praying for you." And this church, Mariemont Church, we prayed for Sonia. And I actually asked her a few times. I said, "When God heals you, can you come with me back to Mariemont Church? I want to show you to the congregation." Now, we haven't, I've retired since then, but she's alive.
Yeah.
And not only alive, but she's cancer free. And she knew all the way through that not only me, but this church and other people, like in our Bible studies, we're praying for Sonia and for the remission of her cancer.
So good.
And so that was, and that was a powerful one. So prayer is, praying for people is a very tangible, non-threatening way to just really reach people in a unique place.
Right, you are serving. That's a great word right there too, Scott. Is that again we can get, and I understand the evangelists among us, we can get too wound up like, oh, I'm praying so that I can lead them to Jesus. You will. There, but when you're looking at I want to serve, I'm going to serve you because I'm going to bring you I know this is the best thing I can bring you is to bring you before the Father. Yeah. And I think there's a heart posture to that.
The one thing I will tell you in my Christian walk that I've struggled with is I've struggled with I've got to save them.
Right.
I've got to lead them to Christ. Right. And as I've matured, I realize that the job of saving people is not mine.
Totally.
That's Jesus Christ. Yep. And planting seeds is actually a very important part of that process. Right. And there are times when you flat out share the Romans road. Sure. You pull out the gospel or you explain John 3:16 and what's being said there. And I mean, there's those times, but then there's a lot of times where God just says, "Scott, just plant the seed, put a little water on that seed. I'll take it from here, but just plant the seed."
Right. This is one of the few guys that actually understands all those agricultural stories.
Right.
Like Scott's like, I know why Jesus said that. We're city slickers. We're like, I don't know why Jesus is talking about that. I don't know what he's saying.
So one of the things we did on the farm, we were always fighting weeds. Every farmer fights weeds, and there's chemical and mechanical way to remove weeds. And mechanical is you go out and you pull them, you hoe them, you cultivate them out or whatever. And you can look back and see there was weeds there and now they're gone. They've been ripped out. The equipment had done that. The tough one is when you spray weeds and you've got this little bit of chemical mixed with lots of water and you spray it on the field and you can't even hardly see the spray. It's so fine, and you know it's coming out, right? And you're done, and every weed is still there. And you drive by the field the next day, and the weeds are still there. And you drive by a week later, and you're like, well, they're still there. And then you drive by a month later, oh my gosh, the weeds are gone. I've learned that sometimes you do something that doesn't even look like you're doing anything, but what you are doing is incredibly powerful, and it sets the stage for what you did today may not look like anything, but a month from now, 6 months from now, the job gets it's done based on what you did today.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really good. The third thing that I learned this, and I'll tell a quick story on this, is how to act in a crisis. Okay. We've always said this at P&G, it's so easy to manage the business when things are good. And COVID came, and we're like, oh, how are we going to manage? Like, everything got turned upside down. But what's funny about COVID was we sold more toothpaste during COVID. We sold more bathroom tissue.
Where was the toilet paper, Scott? I remember that.
Yeah.
Never mind. Go. Keep going.
Well, the funny thing about toilet paper was, and I don't want to be graphic here, but there's in-house occasions and out-of-house occasions. Charmin is the #1 selling bathroom tissue for in-house occasions.
Okay.
We don't sell out-of-house occasions. That's Kimberly Clark has that Scott paper. Other companies have out-of-house. Well, nobody was out-of-house during COVID.
Right.
People weren't at restaurants. They weren't in the office buildings. They weren't, and so all those occasions ended up coming into the house.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so the need for Charmin overnight exploded, and we're good at making toilet paper.
Mm-hmm.
We've got big plants, but it was a lot of instant demand, caused within months, and it was amazingly difficult. And then we set 3 records month to month to month right at the height of the COVID on Crest, and we're like, are people filling their cabinets? Like, what's going on? And then we did, P&G, we got to go look at data, right? So we did a little bit of research, and we found that people weren't going to the dentist because a lot of dentist offices were closed, and the dentists were telling their patients, hey, we're going to be closed. We're not going to be able to do cleanings. We're not going to be able to do, restorative or maintenance work. Make sure you're brushing with a really good toothbrush and a really good stannous fluoride toothpaste. Crest has got the best.
Yeah.
And so people are like, if I can't go to the dentist, let me make sure I brush my teeth.
Yeah.
Number 2, people were home. They were bored.
Right.
I'm going to go brush my teeth. I don't have anything else to do. And then the third thing was really funny was everybody was on Zoom calls. And for the first time, all of a sudden, the vast majority of the population was staring at their face on a computer screen.
Right.
And they're like, I don't want to look bad. And with high definition equipment, people were they were self-conscious, and all other dentistry kind of fell down, restorative and work fell down during COVID. Cosmetic dentistry went up.
Interesting.
Because people are like, I'm going to get my caps on my teeth and things like that. So all of a sudden, overnight, and people were living at home. So they were doing all their laundry at home. There was no dry cleaning. There was no. People weren't wearing suits and ties. They were in sweats and whatever. So people were doing more laundry. So all of a sudden, we were selling more Tide and things like that. So things like that would happen. But anyway,
We derailed you.
Yeah,
Not act in a crisis.
But back to the point of so the crisis is when anybody can manage the business when it's good. How do you manage the business when it's bad? And the one thing that I constantly, now I've been a Christian since I've been 15 years old, so 45 plus years, but I still have to remind myself that I'm a child of God, that I've already won the victory. I'm going to spend eternity in heaven. I mean, it can't, I've won the prize. Forget what my portfolio is, the size of my house, my car, my kids. It doesn't matter. But I still have to remind myself, I'm different. And when crises happen, I often say this, that character is what you are when people aren't looking. Your testimony is what you are when everybody's looking. And so when you're under crisis, people are looking at you as the leader going, how are you acting?
Yeah.
And if all of a sudden you're like, man, this company, these people, that department, man, we'd be okay if it weren't for them, or, all this COVID, all of a sudden you can start throwing aspersions and you can do all this kind of stuff. And people look at you and go, oh, yeah, I expect that.
Yeah.
But when you can manage in a crisis, like the sons of Christ that we are, and realize that we have a higher power within us that we can choose, it doesn't make it easier, and in fact it may make it harder to fight through crisis in a godly way. But people are looking. And the quick story that I want to tell on this, and it'll be very quick. It was May of 1996. I was being promoted and moved to Argentina to be the SMD manager for the country. Heather was 7 months pregnant. I was running the 2 biggest projects for the paper division at the time. We were doing a national launch on a big product, hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, and I was running the national sales meeting, which was, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, my 2 bosses came to me and they said, the national sales meeting, the expectation is perfection. Anything less than that is failure. and they were serious because it was their showcase. They were the leaders, and this was their time. We brought the entire organization to Cincinnati, and it had to be perfect because it was their reputation on the line. And so I was serving them, and all this was going on. And oh, by the way, during this time, my mom developed a brain tumor and my dad died. And we're trying to sell the house. We were trying to move to Argentina and all this. And it was, I mean, you talk about sweat condition 10. And there was a night where I drove from P&G downtown to our house in Pierce Township, and I had to cross the Big Mac Bridge out of downtown into northern Kentucky, then loop around 275, then cross back into Ohio, and then back roads to the house. And I pulled in the driveway, and the first thing I remember was I don't remember anything about the drive. I don't remember crossing the bridges. I don't remember anything. And I remember I physically couldn't get out of the car. I was leaned up against the steering wheel. My head was against. I was done. My body had shut down. Heather came out of the house because somebody called her and they said, Scott is slumped over the steering wheel in your driveway. And she came out. She was scared. And as soon as she opened the door, then I kind of came to, and she realized I wasn't that. But it was the stress was off the chart. And it passed. We got through the national sales meeting, everything, but it was painful. A coworker wrote me a letter, a handwritten letter, and he left it on my desk. And the letter, in so many words, said, how in the world did you make it through the last 6 to 8 weeks? Like, we've been watching, like our offices were all kind of in this cluster. And he goes, how did you do that? And I was at that point, I'm like, people are watching. When you don't think they are, they're watching. So how we react in crisis is a powerful testimony. And when people say, how did you do that? Like I turned to my buddy and said, it's the Lord, man. My faith got me through this. Yeah, I was dragged through the mud, and it was painful, and it was hard and all that. But look at how it's ended up on the other end. I mean, God's plan.
Well, we're following someone who's called the Prince of Peace.
Yes.
We're following that guy.
Yeah.
So, Scott, one of the things I was thinking about, and I said this a lot. Remember, you guys remember this in the church world, because you actually were at our church at that time during COVID. We weren't meeting, as a lot of churches weren't. And I remember doing a lot of we were doing worship sets from my living. I'm doing worship almost every day from my living room, just 4 people, whatever. But I remember thinking to myself, what a phenomenal opportunity for the church to bring the kingdom of God. I mean, this is an amazing opportunity, because while the rest of the world's running around like their hair's on fire, all of a sudden we can go, oh, that's okay. We have see, but like the fruits of the Spirit, it's the fruits of the Spirit. Yeah. And if you're not in the Spirit, if you're not one who knows that bigger, see, you mentioned the bigger picture. You're like, what? God's plans for me are phenomenal. What's going to happen? Oh, I die? Oh, gosh. Now I'm face to face with the most beautiful one. I have a great new body, or however all this functions, however this works. If we have that greater picture, I feel like it's a little bit like we can look at that in the Old Testament of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and of Daniel, right? And the thing is, remember, it said that they would pray every day, 3 or 4 times a day. So when it came time where they had to stand up for what was happening, they were strong men of faith, And so I think, you're always asking practically. See, I think practically, if you're not settled with God is good, my identity is in Him, His plans for me are good. I mean, He loves me, and no matter whether it's the plans that happen in the next year or the next 10,000 years, if you don't have all that stuff kind of settled, then you're going to look the same as the world. And that was surprisingly and disappointing for me, and even in myself at times, where the church looked just like the rest of the world. And see, when these guys looked at you, Scott, the world, it is watching, because I had a really similar thing. I was working in Arizona at a music store, and my dad got cancer. And went very quickly. He was diagnosed in October, dead by February. Yeah. And I just, it was, of course I agree. He was actually my best friend. And so I grieved severely. I cried many nights on Julie's lap, whatever. But I felt God's presence in a way I'd never felt it before. And I had the exact same. I had literally had a guy take me to lunch, one of the other salespeople at the music store I worked at, take me to lunch and be like, I don't understand. How can you be coming into work? because I'm going to work, then I'm going to see him, then I'm, all that as you were talking about. And the thing is, I want to say that crisis, I mean, that's that's a huge thing that you're saying there, Scott. In crisis, in difficulty, man, it's believers walking into that. Like, we have an amazing ministry here in Cincinnati. I'll call out on them. It's Matthew 25 Ministries. And literally, I mean, they were down in New Orleans before FEMA. Mm-hmm. They were literally, I came across my email 2 days ago. They were down already we had recently some tornadoes that had happened literally a day or 2 days ago down. Yeah, they're there. Yeah. They're on top of it. I'm telling you, man, when you walk into that space and you're like, yeah, Jesus is here. People will, even if they don't know him, man, they're gonna be like, what is this? What is happening? But that's not, you don't fake that. You can't go, I need to be strong.
And don't forget that I think God puts us in those situations to glorify him.
Absolutely.
Like and I know this will sound crazy. I don't relish that.
No.
But I do see it as an opportunity. Like, okay, there is a crisis. How do we get through this, and how do we glorify God? And it's almost like at the end, it's almost like the Lord's saying, "Thanks, man. Like, you did it the right way. You took the crisis. You came closer to me. You honored me, and just get ready for the next one because it's coming." I mean, being a Christian is not easy. I mean, you're working out your faith, and which means in the good times and the bad times. And all I'm saying is that people notice you more in the bad times than they do in the good times, because anybody can manage in the good. It's how do you act in the bad?
No question.
For the listener who's thinking practically, because you're exactly right, Raz. If we just try to muster up peace, that's not going to work.
Nope.
So very practically, Scott, what would you say to the listener who's saying, okay, how do I prepare as a believer, as a follower of Jesus? How do I prepare to experience and to lead with peace in the midst of a crisis? Hopefully some of our listeners are not in crisis right now, but it's because really it's some work that's ahead of time. What would you say would be some practical things about cultivating peace prior to crisis?
Some are very practical. One is stay in the Word and prayer on a daily basis. Like, put on your armor of God every day, and know that every day is a battle, and some of them are like little skirmishes. Right. Some of them are like peacetime, and some are really bad. So get that ready. Be ready every day with that kind of a behavior. The second thing I did is, depending on the size of the crisis, I went out and sought out other people and didn't try to do it myself. And one of the is a deacon or elder here at the church. Yeah, elder. Steve Sessler was a mentor of mine at the company. I would often go to Steve and say, hey, you've been down this path before. How do you handle this? And other people. Yep. So I sought out, and it wasn't always other Christians. Like, it was just people that I knew had more experience in a crisis of this nature than I did. And don't try to do it alone. Go get some help.
I like that. That's good.
Stay in prayer. The one thing I found was that, and this was hard, and I don't know why it was like, I would go home and tell my wife, like, Heather, there's some stuff going on at work that's just really, really hard. Now, I don't want to burden you with it, because being a mom and of 5 kids, and like, you've got your own challenges every day. So I don't want to but I need you to know that I'm going through this at work, and it's taken a chunk out of me. So I may not be as attentive as I need to be, and I may need to be at work earlier, later, whatever. But just know that that's happening, and having her support and having her knowledge of it was incredibly important. So it's almost like you're kind of taking the air out of the balloon a little bit, by reaching out to other people with more experience, reaching out to your spouse, people that you know. My small groups, like at church, like at the office, we'd alert. We're in sweat condition 10 here. I got a problem. Be praying for it. That kind of stuff. But kind of sharing the load, if you will, that was a big part of it.
Yeah, that's some really awesome. That's actually some really awesome marriage wisdom right there too. Because a lot of times, or if we hold that in, you've had the chunk taken out, and your wife starts to, and she's like, "Is he mad at me? Is he?" I mean, just by actually just going, "Here's what's happening to me right now." You actually. That is amazing marriage.
Well, it just needs to know.
She just wants to know. She wants to be communicated with. What's going on?
I got humbled early in our marriage. Heather and I were at a party one night, and we were probably married for 2 years. And we were at a party one night, and some woman asked my wife, "What does your husband do?" And Heather was just brutally honest. She goes, "I don't know."
Wow.
And the woman looked at her, and he goes, "Well, he works at Procter Gamble, and he's in sales, but I don't know what he does." And I heard that, and I'm like, and then she wasn't condescending, like she wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, she was, but I thought, wow,
Yeah.
you know, she's right. And then one night she called me. She goes, "Where are you?" And I said, I'm traveling. I'm at Costco.
Mm-hmm.
She goes, "No, but where are you?" She goes, "I don't know what state you're in. I don't know. Are you in the United States? Are you?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm at the Holiday Inn in, you know, Vancouver, you know, Washington, blah, blah, whatever it was." Like, I just didn't, like, it became so rote that, like, she was like, "I don't even know." So like, I learned those, like, you gotta enroll, you know, even if it's just an FYI, you know, like those, like now with technology, you know, you could say like share your itinerary,
Right.
hit the button so that Heather at least know
That's good.
where I am. You know, so those kind of things help. And then the last thing I would tell you about that is that I still think we need to like pause, just pause and go, all right, this is bad. This is like, just pause. Lord, this is bad. I don't even know how to pray about this. I don't know what we're going to do. Like when Cindy called me, well, actually her husband called and said, she's in hospice. And I said, she just went to the oncologist this morning. And he goes, yeah. And her recommend, she'll be dead by the end of the week.
Wow. Yeah.
Pause. Lord, you heard that. You know. What do I do? Let the Lord, like that. Okay, Lord, we're in this together. Mark my steps. But that pause is so important.
I love that.
You know, kind of like a basketball player, the free throw, like they stop, they get the ball in their hand, but they kind of just pause.
Get reset,
and then shoot it. That's so important in a crisis like that.
Great.
Wow.
And then the last one I would tell you about, and this one was also pretty powerful, was my reputation, like who I was every day. And I'm not a teetotaler. Like, I'll drink a beer. I'll have a nice glass of wine. I like a nice gin and tonic in the summertime. But I didn't drink at P&G. Like, I would have a glass of wine like if there was a celebratory something. But I didn't drink. And it wasn't because I'm a teetotaler. It's because it was a small way of setting myself apart. And I never, ever, like, wouldn't lord it over anybody. Like, oh, you drink and I don't. I'm better than you. It wasn't that. It was, oh, that's right, you don't drink. And it was just a small visual cue, almost like Jewish people with their yarmulkes. Like, oh, there's something about you that make you look a little different. You're a little bit different than everybody else. And then the other one I would tell you, when I joined P&G, like I said, I was a kid from a farm. I didn't know anything about business. I knew how to farm, and that was about it. And so I was like one of these guys that was like, what's the best-selling book on leadership? You know, success today, all that kind of stuff. And there's a million of those books out there, right? The Bible probably is the greatest book to read, to learn practical, tactical ways to be a good leader. And the one that just jumped out at me was servant leadership. The first will be last and the last will be first. Taking that, like if you go in like a bull in a china shop and you demand and you kind of require and all that. Now there's times that you got to kind of crack the whip, so to speak. There are those times where, like, honey, I don't want you to get near the expressway. It's like, no, grab them and get them away out of you got to grab people, get them out of harm's way from time to time. But the vast majority of the time, if you serve people first and lead like that, you put yourself, the needs of people first, then they're not working for you out of obligation. They're working for you from their heart. And if you win people's heart, and not just the people you work with, but your customers, if you win their hearts, it's remarkable what can be accomplished when you're working heart to heart versus head to head and that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, we sell consumer products. and we have good, I mean, statistically, tactically, however you want to measure it, we have really good stuff. Like our Tide definitely cleans better than others. Bounty is the quicker picker upper. Stannous fluoride is much better than sodium fluoride. Like all this kind of stuff. Like, we do have really superior products, but at the end of the day, our competition has really good stuff too.
Right.
And what I found with buyers, with customers, was it wasn't me showing up with my brands expecting to win. I had to find ways to serve them in ways that didn't matter. To make a very long story short, I had a buyer at Sam's Club, a guy named Scott Letts, a wonderful man, and his wife had a premature baby, and he was distraught. Like, it was touch and go whether or not. And then it got to the point where, you know what, the baby was going to live, but it was definitely premature. And I was making a call on Scott one day, and my boss handed me a picture of a Marine, and this guy was a stud, 6'5", 225, ripped, full deal and all that. And he goes, give this picture to your buyer, to Scott Letts. I'm like, why? And he goes, read the back. Flipped it over. He was a preemie.
Oh, nice.
And I took him that picture, and if I saw, that was 20 years ago, I called on Scott Letts. If I saw him today, he'd say, hey man, thanks for that picture. It was something subtle, but it went beyond the buyer-seller relate. It was human-to-human contact. That, Scott, whether you buy my stuff or not, your wife had a premature baby, you're a husband, you're a father, you're hurting, and let me give you some encouragement. This stud was 3 pounds 1 ounce when he was born. Little things like that matter to you win people's hearts.
Yeah, well, I want to speak into this one right here. Oh, the Bible's just an old book. Nothing practical today for me. I mean, come on. That's Jesus literally speaking to his boys, his disciples, and he's like, you know what? Here's how kingdom leadership works. We're not going to be like the rest of the world, lording over people. We're going to actually serve the first. It's what you were making reference to, right? The first shall be last, last shall be first. And the funny thing is what I'm hearing you say, Scott, is you're taking a kingdom biblical principle, and it actually helped you with your business. Because you're saying, when I make a heart-to-heart with this customer, we're all that way. If I go to get my hair cut and the person's like super attentive, really I'm like, I really like this person. I'm not going to go get it cut from someone else. I'm going to go get it cut from him or her or whatever, And it's so funny because you do hear that when people don't understand the word, they haven't really looked at it and really looked at even the practical in-depthness of what Jesus is showing. It's so funny because they look at it like, that's just this old historical book, whatever, it doesn't have any relevance to me. No, you look at it and you go, this is the way the kingdom actually works. This is the way the world works. I think Jesus understands that. Right.
And I never went into business going, I'm going to be a Christian so that I can hit my sales targets. Right. It's not like that, but you're right. Like, there are principles, there's ways biblically to treat people, to honor people, to be like Christ with people, that people respond to that.
Right. Every walk of life was drawn to Jesus. Super rich people, the super religious people, prostitutes, tax collectors, all kinds were drawn to him because there's another way. Something is happening here. This is another way. Yeah. We're seeing. And I love that, Scott. I love that so much. Yeah. That's really good, man. Talking about with him in business. Holy cow.
So I was taking notes, Scott. You mentioned Bible studies. That was the first one. Second one was really praying for people, and then that follow-up. So huge. Yep. The third one was being peaceful in the midst of crisis and how you lead during a crisis. That you're modeling Jesus. And the fourth one was biblical principles, specifically servant leadership in your leadership in the marketplace. Now, I know a little bit about your story. So those were the four. I know a little bit about your story. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the entire retirement process of following the Lord in that decision-making process. Look to retire from a substantial career at P&G. Would you talk about that?
Yep. So I was 36 years with the company. I was not going to retire. I loved my job. I loved what I was doing. And to be very frank, I was making more money than I had ever made before. P&G changed the compensation package at my level, and it was more variable. And because business was so good, I made more money. And the annual bonuses were very significant that I had not gotten in a vast majority of my career, but I was getting them towards the end of my career. And our financial planner used to work for me at Procter Gamble. Her name's Maggie Vogley, and what a wonderful woman. And she left, and her husband was a financial planner with Edward Jones, and she left P&G to go work with him and their team. And I mentored her. Like, she wasn't just a direct report, but I mentored her in business. She called me up one day and she goes, "Hey, boss." She always calls me boss. She goes, "Hey, boss." She goes, "We have to have lunch." I'm like, "Great." So I'm thinking she wants some advice. I'm going to coach her. So we met for lunch, and she sat across the table from me and she asked me this question. She goes, "Why are you still working?" And I couldn't answer the question. I was like, well, that's what I do. And, got to put Anna through college and probably pay for her wedding and, still have a small mortgage on the house, typical stuff. And she goes, "You don't have to work anymore." I'm like, "What?" And she goes, "You have enough money that you can retire on. You don't have to do this anymore." And she said those words, "You don't have to do this anymore." I didn't hear Maggie. I really felt like I was hearing the voice of God. And I'm like, no, but I got I've worked my whole life to get to this point. Why would I cut it short? But she got me thinking. So I went home and I told Heather what had happened. And Heather was like, "You're not going to retire, are you?" And for Heather, it wasn't about the money. She was like, "What are you going to do with yourself? I don't need you around here like 24/7.
I have a feeling Julie might say that.
So I said, "Well, you need to come." And if you've ever worked with a financial planner, they've got models and charts and stuff. And Maggie had the big screens, and all that kind of stuff. And Heather came and she got into the numbers. And she goes, "Here's your pile of P&G stock and the other investments you've made." And they run it through a series of what ifs and all that kind of stuff. And she goes, "This will be your retirement income, not even including Social Security, until you're 92 years old." And I'm looking at that going, "Really?" And she said again, she goes, "You don't have to do this anymore." And I'm like, wait a minute.
Same phrase.
Exact same phrase. And so then, Heather and I are driving home. And Heather's like, "I don't know." And again, it wasn't the money with Heather. It was, what are you going to do? You work 60, 70 hours a week and you travel on the weekends and all that kind of stuff. What are you going to do? And I said, "I don't know." So then I went back to Maggie a third time and I said, "Okay, if I choose to do this, how do we do this? Physically, how do I go from a paycheck from P&G to a paycheck from my retirement account?" I didn't even, I didn't clue. That's why I hired Maggie. Right. I don't know I know how to make the money. I don't know what to do with it once I've made it. Right. So she explained it all. And she goes, "We'll do this, we'll do this with it. Your taxes will be this, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll put it in this and all. Here's the plan. And here's your monthly income." I'm like, wow. And she goes, "Scott," she goes, "So I've laid this out just to show you that you don't have to do this anymore." And so then I started praying about it. I'm like, "Lord," I said, "what I heard you say through Maggie was, you don't have to do this anymore. And the only reason why I would keep working is because I don't believe God. Well, yeah, Lord, I know I've got this pile, but boy, if I just had a little bit more, boy, if I just had a couple more of these year-end bonus checks, if I had just a couple more years of profit sharing, and boy, look at how much more money I would have. And boy, my life would be so much better." And then it became an obedience thing. I really felt, and I sought counsel. I talked to Steve Sessler. I talked to Dennis Bozager, to Zeke Swift, all men that retired from P&G. And they were like, "Scott, it sounds like the Lord is leading you to other things." And I'm like, "Yeah, but," and I'm missing the fact that I can retire and not go to the pressure cooker every day. That's not even, I'm worried about, but I could have a brand new Ford F-250, diesel pickup. If, I could do, you're dreaming about, and it wasn't about that. It was about, "Scott, do you trust me?" And I'm like, I can't not retire. Because if I didn't retire, I felt like I was disobeying God's command.
Right.
So at my level, I had to give a year's notice. And I'm like, I don't think God wants me to wait a year. So I met with HR and I said, hey, here's what I'm thinking, and they go, fine.
Wow.
They go, we can do this in 6 months.
Wow.
I'm like, really? And they go, yeah. They go, we have an idea, because P&G is all about succession planning. We do this all the time. And she goes, yeah, we're going to give your job to 3 people, which is okay. That's fine. That's fine. And she goes, this is how we would do it, and we could do that. And by the new fiscal year, 6 months, we got it, no problem. So I took a deep breath and I went into my boss, and it was almost like my boss was waiting she goes, like, we have our monthly one-on-ones. And I said, hey, she goes, you're going to tell me, aren't you? And I'm like, yep. And there was actually a document that you sign at P&G. It is a formal retirement document. And when you sign it and it gets put in the system, you've retired.
Done deal.
It's a done deal. And you do not sign that unless you're ready.
Yeah.
And it takes kind of an act of God once you sign it to get it revoked. Like, it's a serious deal. And, she gave me the document, and I didn't sign it right then, but I went home and I prayed over it one more time, and then I signed it and brought it back the next day. And that was it. And then I transitioned my business to 3 different people, and said my goodbyes to people and that kind of stuff. And it was interesting because a lot of people said, man, how are you going to walk away from this? P&G has been such a big part of your life. And what I realized, what God was telling me was, I never got my identity through P&G. Yeah. I loved working for P&G, and I would do it again. If I could do it all over again, I'd do it all again. But it wasn't who I was. I mean, I'm a child of God, and I'm so many other things. And I'm like, it was a great place to work. It was an ethical place to work. I made a good living doing that. I was able to raise 5 children. Heather could stay at home, put 5 kids through college. We could live a relatively comfortable life, with the rewards of working for P&G. But it was never like, if I don't work here, like because God had other things for me to do. And if I could offer this real quick, when Heather said, what are you going to do? My answer was, I don't know. Yeah. And the funny thing about it was, at P&G, the advice always was, you got to have a plan. Right. Like, what are you going to do? You can't just, because, men that retire, abruptly, they have a heart attack within 6 months. And so, you got to be careful about all this kind of stuff. And I wasn't discounting that, but I'm like, sure. Lord, you want me to retire. What do you want me to do? Yeah. And I think he was kind of like, just hang on. Yeah. So in the meantime, we moved from Mariemont to Northern Kentucky. We moved there because, my job was all travel, so I wanted to be closer to the airport. Number 2 was Anna was enrolled at nursing school at Northern Kentucky University, and she wanted to live at home. It was COVID. It was easier to live at home. And quite frankly, we didn't need the big house in Mariemont anymore. Kids were out of school. We didn't need the schools anymore, and the taxes and stuff in Mariemont. So it was just financially like, let's downsize. Let's get a smaller house. So we looked for houses. And it was at the peak of when the market was going nuts, and everything was being sold, and everything was being sold like way over asking price and all that. And I'm like, are we doing the right thing here? We looked at houses, nothing. And then finally, our real estate agent called us one day, and he goes, hey, he said, there's a house. It's not on the market. It won't go on the market, but it's for sale. It's a pocket listing. You want to see it? I'm like, well, I'm at work. I could probably move a couple things and give you a couple hours. And I drove down from Mason down to Independence, Kentucky. We saw the house. And honestly, I was like, it's a nice house. It's in a nice neighborhood on a nice cul-de-sac, but it was in the house. And I was kind of thinking, oh. And our plan was, this was a step. Move here, get Anna through college, and then we would buy our forever house, which is probably a farm. That was our plan. And so Brad takes us through the house, and we had 9 boxes. We had 9 things that we wanted in the house. It checked all 9. And I said to Brad, I think this is the house we're supposed to buy, but it almost seems too good to be true, And so we prayed about it. We stood in the kitchen, we prayed about it, and we got a peace about it. And then this happened. I said, now, Brad, what's the price of this house? And he told me, and I was like, shouldn't it be $50,000 more? And he said, it should be. He goes, if I were listing it, I would have listed it for $50,000 more. But he said, they want a quick sale. They don't want to list it, and they don't want to do anything Like when we toured the house, there were dirty dishes in the sink.
Right.
There was laundry in the laundry baskets. Like there was like,
Okay.
it was,
We're not prepping this thing
they're
for
not
sale.
prepping this for sale.
Yeah.
And Brad said, no, don't worry, because if the inspection shows a lemon, you can get out of the sale. I'm like, great. That's our backup. So we agreed to buy it, signed all the documents and all that. And then we had an inspector come through. Another story for another day. Interesting dude. We were allowed to walk around the house with the inspector. He gets all done. He's from Boston. He's got this heavy Boston accent. And he looks at me and he goes, this is one of the best houses, the 20-year-old houses I've ever seen. He goes, if you don't buy it, I am. I'm like, well, I guess we're buying this house.
Right.
So we buy the house. Like some cosmetic things we had to do, some flooring and paint and whatnot. Moved in. Everything's fine. And I'm like, but why are we here? Like, this just seems like of the places we've lived around the world, like this is like, it was a nice house. Don't get me wrong. It was a wonderful house in a nice neighborhood. Long story short, we had neighbors to the left of us, a young couple. And it was they were in their late 30s. He owned his own company. She was a stay-at-home mom. They had 2 beautiful little kids. And I get a call at the office one day and they go, and it was Paul and Stephanie and their kids were Noah and Sophie. Got a call at the office. Paul died. Drug overdose. What we learned about them, and we did not know them well. They were right next door, but we didn't know them that well. And Stephanie was really standoffish the whole time. Like she almost seemed angry all the time we saw her. I'm like, it's kind of unfortunate. Kids were wonderful. Kids were so friendly, so sweet and innocent. And we found out later on that Paul had a serious drug problem and had for a long time. And he took drugs that were laced with fentanyl, and he died. So here's a young mom, 2 little kids. We're in our house, and I'm on business. I'm traveling. Heather gets a knock on the door on a Wednesday night, and it's Stephanie, and she looks like she's been crying. She looks haggard, and she's a beautiful woman, but she looked just haggard. She came to the door, and she said, do you go to church? And Heather goes, yes, we do. And she said, I need to be in church. My kids need to be in church, but I won't go unless you take me. And Heather, being Heather, she goes full mama bear. And she goes, we will take you. And we knew right away that we needed to be in a local church in Northern Kentucky because bringing them back to Mariemont, as much as we love Mariemont Church, the kids don't know anybody, it's better in the neighborhood. Yep. So Heather went on full beast mode and she's like online and she's looking for churches and she's going and going. And we end up at Hickory Grove Baptist Church in Independence, Kentucky. And we met with the outreach minister and she came to the door and she gave Heather a full tour. And Heather came home and she goes, we're going to Hickory Grove. I'm like, okay. And just the conviction that Heather had, because the kids could be in children's church with kids that they go to elementary school with.
That's awesome.
The women that, and so we started taking Stephanie and she hadn't been in church in years. And I think it was first 10 weeks, she cried all the way through the services, but we kept bringing her. And it was obvious. Oh, so this is one of the assignments you had for us. Was to minister to this young family. And I go back to what I started with. When you live your life, your faith with open hands, where you say, Lord, what do I do? And I remember when we made a decision to leave here to go to Independence, like I had to come back and tell Jamie, because Jamie was just transitioning to be the senior pastor from Dennis. And I'm like, this whole men's ministry thing that I wanted to lead, like, I think God's got something else. And I explained it, and you took about 1/8 of a second to go. Yeah. God's got, like, Scott, God's got a plan for you. Yep. Go follow him. And I'm like, but I really like it here. And it wasn't the first time that Heather and I left a really good church and went to a different place, and God used us. When we went to Canada, we weren't going to leave. Like, I was going to be the national sales manager for food and beverage in Canada. And I'm like, but do we really want to do that? Like, we got this church and the kids and all that. And we went to a Sunday night service, and the visiting pastor, amongst other things, said, and sometimes God may ask you to do something like leave your church. And I'm like, I looked at Heather and I said, I think we're going to Canada. And we ended up going to Canada, and we landed in this little bitty tiny Richmond Hill Baptist Church on Wright Street in downtown Richmond Hill. And it was one of the most glorious 7 years of our lives. And the work
So awesome.
that God did through us and that we were able to benefit from at that little Baptist church was, I mean, we often say that was like the 7 best consecutive years of our lives. It was just such a wonderful experience. And again, by leaving your hands open to God, you may be leaving something wonderful to go into something unknown that obviously God has got a plan for you. And so we've adopted Stephanie and the kids, and
It's beautiful.
and mowing her lawn, doing her yard work, shoveling her driveway. We watch the kids after school sometimes so Stephanie can go do other things.
Right.
And now that's slowing down a little bit because she now has a new boyfriend and things are changing in their lives. But that's a place that God had us at that moment.
Yeah.
When she came to the door and said, "Do you go to church?"
Right.
I'm like, so that's why
you go.
that's why God put us in this little red brick house.
Exactly. One of the things sometimes we'll hear the phrase that the kingdom is upside down kingdom, you know?
Yeah.
And one of the things I think would be really hard, so you can speak to the guys like that. Me and Jamie, well, Jamie's probably more than I am, but we're pretty free and loose. I mean, hey, whatever God's doing, right? But someone who's literally been you weren't just trained by P&G. If you're a farm guy, there's nothing unplanned there.
Right.
I mean, you were planning everything.
Yep.
You grew up planning.
Yes.
Heck, being in the Catholic Church, man, it's laid out every Sunday what you're going to be doing every weekend.
No, you're exactly right.
You go to P&G where they teach you to plan even better.
Yeah.
All right. And then the kingdom, that upside down kingdom comes along and says, "No, Scott, I'm not going to give you this next step." It's the Abram thing again, right? And how do someone like you and others who are listening like you, how do you get yourself into that place of like, okay, is it really hard? I feel like it would be really hard. Like,
It's
God,
not
I'm gonna
hard,
trust you for this.
but it's deliberate.
Okay.
So we moved 9 times with P&G.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And we said every time we're followers of Christ first.
Mhm.
We're employees of Procter
you
and
go.
Gamble
There
second.
you go.
So wherever you put us,
Yes. There
we
you go.
we go in with the attitude of,
Love that.
so what do you got
It's the
planned for us
kingdom.
here?
What's happening in the kingdom right
And
now?
it was not uncommon.
Yes.
So when we moved to Richmond Hill, when we moved to Canada, I'll never forget this. We were at a hotel on the Don Valley Parkway, a long way from Richmond Hill, and it was a Sunday night. And Heather said, "Hey, we need to go up to Richmond Hill if that's where we think we're going to move," because there was some reasons why Richmond Hill seemed like the right village to move to. Let's go see if they have a church up there. And I'm like, "Oh, come on, that's like a long way away and Toronto traffic and all that." And she goes, "No, you got to go." And we found the church before we found the house. And it was not uncommon for us to look for churches first and then houses. And not that God needs you to be in that church to work through you, but every time we moved, we said, "Okay, Lord, this is a different place. And for whatever reason, you've chosen to use us as kind of nomads.
Sure.
So how do we serve the kingdom?" And I mean, I could bore you for another hours and hours about what God did in each one of those moves but we went in with the attitude of, we're not here to be served. We're here to serve. So how do we look for what God's trying to do and listen for His voice and His lead?
And when you do look back, isn't that such a cool adventure?
Totally.
I mean, when you open your hands, it's such a cool adventure. And wow, that He would have you with this lady. That's so cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, let me speak out of the other side of my mouth for just a second. Yeah. We're learning this a little bit now. The one downside to all the moving was there is a lot of value in continuity. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we sacrificed with all the moves was kids stopped and started, stopped and started, and stopped and started. Now, there was a lot of benefits to where we were and the experience the kids had and being in other countries and being in other cultures and things like that. They benefit, but they also, they had to go into new youth groups and they had to go into new places and the girls had to make new friends or didn't get new friends. And there was some pain associated with that. So, so it's not all you got to be conscious of that. And if I could go back, if the one thing that I've learned through all of this is all the wonderful things that we were able to do for the kingdom, I would be even more deliberate with the spiritual development of the kids and be a lot more, deliberate about that than I was. Yeah. It was like the surface, everything looked great, but then when you start peeling it back as the kids get older and they're much more free to kind of explain like what they were feeling when they were younger. We're doing some damage control is not the right word, but we're doing some, okay, let's go back and let's recognize the fact that there was a period of your time where you were in pain. you weren't making friends. You were being bullied in school or whatever because of this particular move. And so let's bring that to the surface. Let's confess that. Let's ask for healing. So there's pluses and minuses to all of that.
Well, that's part of their story. And then and God's going to show up in that. And so,
but as a
hard.
spiritual leader of the family, I do take that responsibility very seriously. And I don't say that I failed in that, but I certainly would do things. Hindsight's always 20/20. I would do things differently and be more deliberate in that.
I hear you. I know exactly.
And I appreciate your honesty on that. I think that's really, I'm thinking for the listeners who sometimes we hear these conversations, we hear these stories, and it can feel a little bit like, oh, this person's got it all together, But to hear, no, there's challenges.
Absolutely,
there's challenging moments here.
Yeah.
And so, thank you for sharing that. That's really, really encouraging.
For sure.
Scott, thank you for your time, man. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
This has been awesome, and we love you. And it's been fun walking through, part of this with you and having those conversations. I remember when you said, "Hey, Jamie, I know you're about to be the lead pastor. I was planning on, being here for you, a right-hand man." I think the Lord, is got a different assignment. And I do remember those days.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool just to watch you and Heather and the kiddos just obey, follow Jesus, and be open-handed towards what he's doing. So
we do miss you. So.
Yeah, we do miss you. Yeah, it's not like I'm glad he's leaving. No, we've missed you, but it's been really, really cool to see what the Lord's been doing through you, and so that's such an encouragement.
Yep.
Such an encouragement.
For sure.
I wonder, would you be willing to just pray for our listeners? Just pray over them, however you feel led, and then just pray as you feel led about any of these things or anything else.
Yeah, great. Our dear Lord and Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your presence here and for leading this discussion and allowing us to share our story, a story that you've written through us. And Father, my prayer for the people that are listening to this podcast is to, if they're not already doing this, to lead their lives open-handed, to be ever looking for how you want to work in our lives. And Father, I've written so many to-do lists and life plans and I'm goal-oriented and I have things that I want to do, that I want to accomplish. And in many cases, Father, you've allowed that to happen. But so many times, Father, your plan for me has been different and somewhat scary. And so, Father, I pray that people that might be in that same situation, I pray that they would have the freedom to just allow you to have your way in their lives. And it can get messy, and it can be scary, and it can be not what we planned. But Father, if you are truly leading it and you're guiding us and we are trusting in you, we know that you love us and that you want what's best for us and that for you to be honored and glorified through what you have us to do, Father, is where we need to be. And that's not easy to do. And I'm glad that what Jamie shared at the end, Father, yes, we've had a lot of wonderful successes, but Father, it has been difficult and it's messy. And, it's like the duck that slides across the water. Above the water, everything looks smooth and calm, but underneath, you're flailing like crazy. And there's been many times that we've flailed like crazy. And there have been tense moments and pain and agony and stress. But you've not forsaken us through any of it. And so, Father, it is our prayer, and it's my prayer for the people listening, that God would be glorified in your lives and that there would be practical, tactical ways every day where you can bring the kingdom into whatever world you're in, whether it's at work, it's at home, it's at school, wherever it is, Father. We know that through your power we can bring the kingdom and bring your love and your grace to so many people. And Father, in a world that is searching for truth, you're the truth. And so, Father, give us the courage to never stop talking about the truth and talking about the kingdom. Because at the end of the day, Father, it's not about politics. It's not about Republican, Democrat. It's not about conservative or liberal or woke or conservative, whatever all that is, Father, in our culture. There is one king. There are two judgment thrones in the end. One is for believers and one is for non-believers. And it is my prayer, Father, that anyone that is not sure of their salvation, if they are not sure of whether or not they will stand before Christ at the end and be offered and ushered into heaven or be cast into hell, if people listening to this podcast are questioning that, they're not sure of where they'll spend eternity, Father, I pray that they reach out to Raz or to Jamie or even to me, and we'd be happy to share what we know to be true from the Word of God. At the end of the day, Father, we pray for prosperity. We pray for good health. We pray for all these wonderful things. And you ask us to do that. But what's most important, Father, is where do we spend eternity? And have people made a decision for or against Christ? So, Father, it is my prayer today that those that don't know Christ would seek him. And if you earnestly seek him, you will find him. And it is my prayer that you do so. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
Yeah,
Amen.
Man. Dude, we love you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We do miss you here a lot
Thanks.
and your awesome family.
Thanks.
I had the privilege of having your girls in my youth group and got to go with them on mission trips. And so, man, I just bless you and this new season in life. Well, now you get into it a little bit.
I got to tell you, one of the best,
bless you
one of the most favorite photos of our kids is Ella in Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
And she's walking away from the camera, but she's got two little Haitian girls in each hand.
Love that.
And, she's just loving on them.
Love it.
And I'll never, that's one of my favorite pictures I've got in my archives is her trip to Haiti. And you were there. You guys were there together.
Wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah, we have some similar pics with our son Jesse, who they were good friends. Then. But anyway, well, man, thank you. I agree with Jamie. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for your time of looking in, listening in, wherever and whenever you're at. And so I am Raz, Dr. J, an awesome guest, Scott Hobart, and we love you guys. If you've enjoyed this and you think it's something that somebody's got to hear this, make sure that you send it their way. Go ahead and subscribe if it was helpful to you. And finally, I want to thank our boy Mikey B.
Yeah, Mike.
For making us look real good. Sound real good. There it was. I heard audio of him.
That's right.
We need a Mike episode. We need to bring Mike
we do.
behind the camera in front of the camera.
He won't let us. He's not going to let us. So. Anyway, well, hey, we love you guys. Thanks for looking in.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.